Good morning, third graders. Remember how I told you that we're going to be writing stories about Because of Winn-Dixie, that book we've been reading? Well, today we're going to talk about some pre-writing strategies that we can use before we actually start writing the story. And these pre-writing strategies will help you collect some ideas that you can use when you actually write your story. We'll be talking about 4 different types of pre-writing strategies. These can also be called graphic organizers. And the first one that we'll be talking about is called a web. And I know that we've used webs before, but I kind of want to remind you on how to use them just in case you forgot. The next one we'll be talking about is the Venn diagram. And this is where we'll be comparing 2 different things in a story. The third type of pre-writing strategy we'll be talking about is called a 5 W's chart. And we've talked about the 5 W's before, and we're going to be answering some questions using those 5 W's. And the fourth one that we'll be talking about is called a flow chart. And this is where we'll be putting events in order that have been happening in the story. So let's start talking about a web. If you remember, there's that circle in the center. It's kind of a big circle, and that's where we put the main topic of the story. And then we have the lines and the little circles connected to those lines. And those little circles are where we put facts about the main topic. So remember when we read Bear's Friends Find a Way? Well, that's the story that I want to use when I give you the examples. So the first example with Bear's Friends Find a Way is a web example. See how Bear's in the middle? That's because I'm using Bear as the main topic. And I have 4 facts about Bear. So let's see those 4 facts. The first fact is that Bear is big and strong. The next fact is that Bear likes honey, and he likes honey a lot. He had honey for breakfast at the beginning of the story. The next fact about Bear is that he has a really good sense of smell. And our last fact about Bear is that he's a really good friend to everyone. See how those facts connect to Bear? That's why Bear is in the center. Our next pre-writing strategy is called a Venn diagram. Venn diagrams compare and contrast 2 different things in a story. And you see those outer parts of the circle? That's where we're going to write our differences of the 2 different characters or topics in the story. And those connecting parts of the circles were in the center, that's where we're going to write our similarities or what they have in common. So let's use this with Bear's Friends Find a Way. We're going to be talking about Bear and Rabbit. So let's start off with Bear. What are some things about Bear? Well, Bear is big. Bear also can't fit through trees because he's too big. And one other fact about Bear is that he has a really good sense of smell. Now let's talk about Rabbit. Rabbit's not going to be the same as Bear. The first thing about Rabbit is that he's small. The next fact about Rabbit is that he can't swim. And the third thing about Rabbit is that he has a really good sense of hearing. Now, while they have some differences, they also have some things in common. The first thing that Bear and Rabbit have in common is that they both need help from their friends. Bear needed help from his friends when he couldn't fit through the path of trees, and Rabbit needed help when he couldn't get over the river because he couldn't swim. The other thing that they have in common is that they both help their friends out in some sort of way. The next pre-writing strategy that we'll talk about is the 5 W's chart. And this will ask, what has happened in the story? Who was it happening to? When did this event happen? Where did it happen? And why did it happen? So let's try this with Bear's Friends Find a Way. The first question is, what was happening? Well, Bear couldn't fit through the trees. And who was this happening to? Well, we already know who it was happening to. It happened to Bear. And when did this event happen? It happened on their way to the pond to go play the pebble game. The next question is, where did this happen? This happened in the forest. And the last question is, why did it happen? And this happened because Bear was too big to fit through that small path of trees. The last pre-writing strategy that we're going to talk about today is called a flowchart. And a flowchart has a small square at the top with bigger squares underneath that small square. And that small one at the top is where we put the main topic. And then those bigger squares underneath is where we put the story, the events that happen throughout the stories. And something important to remember about a flowchart is that the events are put in order, starting at the beginning of the story, and you keep putting them in order throughout the story. So it can go to the beginning to the end. So let's use Bear's Friends Find a Way as an example. The topic that I used for this was, once again, bear. So what was the first thing that happened in the story? Well, the first thing that happened in the story is that Bear wakes up in the morning and he gets breakfast. And then what happens after Bear wakes up and gets breakfast? His friends come to visit him and they tell him about the pebble game. And then on their way to the pond to go play the pebble game is when Bear was too big to fit through that small path of trees. And this can keep going on and on throughout the story, but I just wanted to give you an idea using the first 3 things that happened. So now that we've talked about the 4 different types of pre-writing strategies that we're going to use today, let's just kind of recap on what we talked about, just so we remember. Let's start with webs. Webs talk about a specific topic, and that specific topic that we're talking about is going to go in that middle circle. And then connected to that middle circle is the line with the smaller circle. And you can have as many of these as you want. And those small circles are going to include facts about that main topic, just like we did with Bear. The next one that we talked about is a Venn diagram. And Venn diagrams compare and contrast 2 different things in a story. The outside parts of the circles, where they're not connected, those have the differences between the 2 topics that you're using. And then the inside parts of the circle, where they connect, that's in the very center of those 2 circles, that's where we put the similarities, or what those 2 topics have in common, just like we did with Bear and Rabbit. The next one that we talked about was the 5 W's chart. And this talked about the 5 different W's. It asks about what was happening in the story. The next one we asked about was, who is it happening to? The third question is, when did it happen? The fourth one, where did it happen? And then the fifth one, why did it happen? And the very last one that we talked about was called the flow chart. And just as a reminder, a flow chart has a small square with the bigger squares going under it. And that small square at the top includes the main topics, like we did with Bear. Bear is the main topic. And then the boxes under it have those events, and those go below the box. And remember, that very important thing to remember is that the events go in order from the beginning to the end. Now that we've talked about the 4 different pre-writing strategies that we're going to use, I want you to pick one that you really want to use, and I want you to try working on that before you actually write the story about Because of Winn-Dixie. And if you need any help, I'll be coming around to answer questions and to help you out. So let's start writing.